Chapter 13. The Stag at Bay. Time passes away equally for those who are not loved as well as those loved. The new year set in and months passed by. When the rapeseed came into bloom here and there, Jiro entered the village school. He liked school very much. Every morning he rushed out of his house, leaving his big brother behind. His class was mixed with girls, and he was assigned to sit in the first row by the window. It happened that Otsuru had her seat next to him. The tadpole was still on her cheek, but it could not be seen very well because he sat on her right. For the time being, school was over in the morning. Then Otsuru and Jiro ran into the keeper's room for their lunch, rice balls and pickled radishes. The rice balls were always sprinkled with salt, while the radishes were as tough as a hemp rope. The plain food, however, was attractive enough for them and always made their mouths water. Jiro was strictly forbidden to eat at the keeper's. His mother told him on the very day of the entrance ceremony, but Jiro and his old nurse seemed to have completely forgotten the warning. Ohama was prepared to retort to Otami with this excuse. "But I'm not asking to be paid for master's lunch at all." It was always Naokichi that was put to trouble on account of Jiro's late return. He could go between the school and his house or the Masaki's by himself. Sometimes he hid himself among the rapeseeds for about an hour on his way back, making his chaperone return by himself. However, Jiro never stayed overnight at Ohama's room. In fact, he was driven back by her whenever he was lingering about. Jiro sometimes did not like to go home. Then he would return to the Masaki's. Once he went there, he would stay there for a week or so to attend school. At first, the Masaki's worried about him, but soon gave it up because he came back again and again. "Which in the world is your real home, eh?" said Grandmother Masaki to him at dinner. He was like a member of the Masaki's. On the other hand, his staying out was looked on differently by the Hondas. Otami, his mother, regretted that she could not influence him as much as she would have wished. She ascribed her failure to Ohama, his nurse. Grandmother Honda did not care about his future at all, but would grumble with a sigh. "I'm at my wit's end with Jiro. He stays with the Masaki's too often. What will they think of us? I'm afraid they think us foolish. How can I regain faith?" Shunsuke was disgusted with his wife and mother, who were complaining only through egotism, and sometimes thought that it might be better to put him in the care of the Masaki's. "There's nothing to worry about," he said. "Let us leave him with them for some time." The more his wife and mother grumbled, the more he clung to his idea. But when he came home on Saturday and did not see Jiro, he would immediately visit the Masaki's to bring him back. Jiro made a lot of friends at 3 different places: at his own home, at the Masaki's, and at the school. His forcefulness, lively spirit, and cleverness made it possible to have his own place wherever he went. He was not very strong because of his small physique, but was almost second to none in spirit and cleverness. He sometimes played with his elder friends as if he were their leader. His influence became greater in his world after he beat Kitaro, the bossy boy, in a fight. Kitaro was 2 years older than he and was the eldest son of Shohachi, who ran a fish store and a catering farm in the village. He was tall and strong, while his father had some authority over the villagers. As a result, he behaved selfishly and bullied other children, though he was a coward by nature. Kyoichi, Jiro's brother, was very afraid of him when he had to go to school and back home with him. Jiro was obedient to him for some time, but his patience did not last so long. One day, Jiro was eating lunch with Otsuru in the keeper's room when Kitaro happened to peep in from the window. "Give me one of your rice bowls," he said. Jiro and Otsuru looked at each other and kept silent. There were 2 rice bowls left in the bowl, which were, of course, to be shared by them. "Come on, now," he said, bending over the windowsill. They quickly turned their backs to hide the bowl from him. Jumping down the sill, Kitaro grabbed a lump of soil and threw it to the ceiling of the room. Down fell the pieces of dirt over the precious bowl, sprinkling over the rice bowls. Jiro's eyes burned with anger. Rising to his feet violently, he jumped over the sill to the ground. He dashed to Kitaro and tackled him around his waist from the back. In strength, however, he was no match for the tall boy. The next moment he was thrown on his back, with Kitaro's heavy wood-like knees on top of his chest. His hands were pressed hard to the ground by Kitaro's big hands. Jiro kicked his legs desperately and spat at him, but his spit fell back on himself, not hitting his enemy. It was very hard for him to breathe too. The more Jiro wiggled, the more tightly Kitaro's knees pressed his body. He felt like crying, but Jiro had all his wits about him in a pinch. He would always regain his presence of mind at the very last stage of an urgent situation, so that he could draw some clever trick out of it. He watched Kitaro's face for a few seconds and slowly moved his eyes down to the knees lying on his chest. They were round and shining in the sun, only 1 inch above his mouth. The next moment saw Jiro's head jerk up, his face strain like a bulldog, and his mouth, with a few decayed teeth and several rice grains around, bit into Kitaro's knee as hard as it could. The bully screamed like a mortared horn, his hands scraping about madly in the air. Jiro was in a frantic mood and felt his mouth get a little salty. When he came to himself, Jiro was standing surrounded by a lot of noisy students. Kitaro was stooping on the ground, holding his knee with his hands, yelling at Jiro like a mad dog. "What's this?" shouted a teacher from his classroom. At the same time, Ohama's high-pitched and confused voice was heard. What he had done made him feel really scared, and he dashed out through the surprised students for the gate. The moment he passed it, he stopped. "Shall I go home or to the Masakis?" he wondered. He had never shed someone's blood. He knew it was such a serious problem to be settled. Then he remembered that it was the day when his father would come home. "Yes, he will help me," he said to himself. He made up his mind to conceal himself in the grove of the village shrine till he came back, but he could not feel at ease there either. He was tormented by thinking this and that. All the villagers might besiege him at any moment. "What shall I do if Kitaro's father comes with a kitchen knife?" he thought. Maybe I'll be safer at my home. He ran away from the grove. That evening he overheard Shunsuke, Otami, and Ohama talking in the dining room. "What did the teacher say to you?" said Shunsuke to his wife. "He said we'd better pay a visit to Shohachi as soon as possible." "But you went up to him already, didn't you?" he said. "Yes, just to apologize," said Otami. "Isn't that enough?" "But Jiro injured his son badly," said Otami. "Shohachi won't forgive us unless we pay something." "Shohachi won't forgive us? Did the homeroom teacher say that to you?" said Shunsuke. "Yes, he did." "I don't think he's right," he said. "If my son was in the wrong, I'll be ready to apologize to him or anybody and pay the money too. But in this case, isn't Kitaro elder than my son in the first place?" "Yes, sir," said Ohama. "You're quite right. It was Kitaro who started it by teasing him." "But what is the truth after all?" said Otami. "I've questioned Jiro 20 times, but there's still much I don't get at all." "Otsuru said Kitaro threw a lump of dirt at them," said Ohama. "That triggered the fight." "Did he throw it suddenly?" said Otami. "Yes, so I heard." "Did he do that without any reason?" said Otami again. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I heard Kitaro threw it over the windowsill while they were playing together." Jiro was very anxious about the rice balls, but nothing was mentioned. They also thought he had done well not to tell his mother about the meal. "You shouldn't have allowed them to play in your room," said Otami. "It's over now anyway," said Shunsuke. "I was told Shohachi is coming up this evening unless we visit him with consolation money," said Otami with an uneasy look. "Let me do that if he wants to," said Shunsuke. "I don't mind it at all. It's he that should come to us to apologize, isn't it?" "I'm afraid it will make the matter worse," said Otami. "Never mind," he said. "Let me teach him a lesson." "Maybe Shohachi will understand in the end," said Ohama to Shunsuke. "But his son is hurt. We'd better visit him, I suppose, for the good of Jiro-san." "I wouldn't do that simply because I think of my son's benefit," said Shunsuke. "You're both worrying about Kitaro's wound so much, but Jiro did it at the risk of his life. There weren't any other means against a bully stronger than himself. Why do we have to impugn our son's righteousness by the money?" He told them ardently. Jiro didn't have any idea why he was so serious, but was sure that his father did not think ill of his behavior. "But if you say such a thing to him, Jiro will become more violent," said Otami. "Of course I won't say so in his company," he said. "I don't have any intention of making him a bulldog." "No kidding," said Ohama. "This is the way my husband talks," said Otami. "You can't guess if he's serious or joking at all." "Don't worry, Otami," he said. "I'm anxious about Master Jiro," said Ohama. "What if he does not like to come to school?" "Don't be silly, Ohama," he said. "If he doesn't go to school, let me send him to Shohachi as an apprentice." Otami and Ohama burst into laughter, but his father's words hit Jiro's mind. Before long, he was called to his father for a bit of warning and went to bed at about 9 o'clock. His warning was very different from his mother's long preaching. "If you think you're right, persist in fighting any strong enemy," he said, "but stop your biting from now on." Jiro was a little uneasy that Shohachi might appear in anger, but soon fell into sleep. He had no idea how long it had passed since he fell asleep. He was awakened by a very loud voice from the dining room. "Then you say if a boy faces an older boy he can do anything he likes?" roared the voice. It was Shohachi yelling at his father. "That's not what I mean," he said. "Don't you understand me after I have told you this long?" "No," he shouted. "I can't get any idea what a learned man like you says." "All right," said Shunsuke. "If my son hadn't bitten your son, what do you think would have happened?" "Nothing would have, of course." "I don't think so, Shohachi," said Shunsuke. "If he hadn't bitten your son, my son would have to suffer from his bullying from hereafter, though it would be to the degree that he wouldn't be physically wounded. To have your knee cut a bit, or to be made a lifelong coward. Which do you think is more miserable, eh? You're regarded as something in this village. I don't think you can't understand what I have told you." Shohachi gave his answer, but it was done in such a low voice that Jiro could not make it out. "I know how angry you were when your son had a plum-sized place bitten off his knee. I don't think my son was right when he acted like a dog." Again the dog, he thought, and touched his mouth softly. Shunsuke went on. "So at first I thought I'd better visit you to apologize and make some reparation. Then I was told that you'd force a quarrel on us if we didn't make reparation. That would be all right, and I don't think your demand out of the question. But if your son and mine happen to know of this secret business, what would become of them? To settle a problem by means of money, isn't it our duty as parents to bring up our children to be manly boys, not to be deceived by money?" "Yes, it is," said Shohachi. "I understand what you mean." "I'm glad that you understood me," said Shunsuke. "If you need money, ask me any time. But let us put it aside from our son's fight, shall we? I hope we can keep our friendship as always. How about you?" "Sir, I'm ashamed I had a mean—" "Now you understand me. Thank you, Shohachi," he said. "Otami, dear, bring in a cup of rice wine for us, please." Jiro's strain slackened. Extending his hands to their full lengths, he thought that his life would be much more extended from the following day. He pictured his father as a different personality from what he had been. Jiro did not know what a boss meant, but he thought the word might be more becoming to his father than to Shohachi.